Well, thank you so much for joining me. Um, why don't you just, what happened last night? Or this morning, I should say.
Well, what we've seen from the Assembly Republican leadership is unfortunately a pattern of behavior that constitutes a gross abuse of power. And last night that culminated in them taking illegal action, certainly action that's against the rules, to cut off debate, stifle the ability of Democrats to debate the bill, and then take a vote where Democrats didn't even have the opportunity to cast their votes. So they silenced not only us, but our ability to represent our constituents.
Sorry, it was a 17-second vote, is that right?
I don't know exactly how long it was, but in the chaos of the moment, they did not properly open the roll. They didn't go through the normal procedure for doing that, and we certainly were not at a point where we were ready to vote. So as members were trying to get the attention of the chair and demanding to be recognized, which they must be under the rules of the Assembly, they began voting, and the Speaker Pro Tem, who stands at the front of the room and runs the proceedings, actually has a computer screen and can see what the vote total is. And to me, it was quite interesting that that the vote closed so quickly, and nobody ever said, has everyone voted as they wish, which normally you would say 3 or 4 times, and if a member hadn't voted, you hold the roll open and you say, gentlemen from the 77th, please cast your vote. So that did not happen. And it's obvious when you look at the record that they had 51 votes in favor. And so when they hit that magic number, it appears to me that the Speaker Pro Tem must have just immediately closed the roll. And then the Republicans, without a second thought or a second look, just exited the chamber.
So it was clearly coordinated.
It was. And the other thing that was curious was it appeared that it had been coordinated with state troopers as well, because there was an immediate sort of rush or swarm of state troopers onto the floor of the Assembly, not for any protective reason. There's not been any security threats throughout this whole 2-week process, but to prevent Democrats from going into the hallway and to prevent the media from getting to Republicans.
Really?
Well, that's what it appears now. I've looked at a couple of the YouTube videos, but certainly it was stunning when you watch the coordinated marching in of the state troopers.
Almost the switching of the Republicans with the troopers.
Right. And what's interesting about that is that the Speaker of the Assembly's father was just appointed to head the state troopers. And so Fitzgerald Sr. heads the troopers, his elder son is the Senate Majority Leader, and his younger son is the Assembly Speaker. Right. So this is a family that has consolidated a tremendous amount of power in state government.
Isn't his brother in the Senate?
Yes, the Senate Majority Leader.
So it's the Senate and the Assembly?
Both run by Fitzgerald brothers, yes.
Wow.
And when you see, it's not necessarily that would lend itself to corruption, but when you see the kind of pattern of just premeditated, gross abuse of power, then I think, it's very difficult to look at those facts and say, oh, there's nothing there.
Right. Now, have you had a chance to inspect the rules? I heard that it may be possible to overturn the vote.
Well, we're in totally uncharted waters here. So certainly we're looking at all of our possible options. We do not intend to give up or remain silent on this issue. We believe still that our rights are trampled in an effort to trample the rights of Wisconsinites, and we're not going to stand for that. As for what the possible remedies might be, it's very unclear, and we're certainly exploring a wide variety of options, procedural, legal, constitutional remedies, whatever might be available, because we believe that we have that responsibility to our constituents. And the fact that so many members, Democratic members, were not even allowed to vote is, I think, pretty clear evidence that some misconduct beyond just a violation of our Assembly rules occurred.
Right. That was going to be my next question. What is next? What beyond fighting that motion in itself? What can you do to stop the bill now?
Well, the fight on this bill is far from over. The bill still must pass the Senate, and as of now, our Democratic colleagues are standing strong that they are not going to allow this kind of trampling of people's rights. And they are doing a tremendously courageous thing, and we should all be very grateful. I know my Assembly colleagues and I are very grateful to our colleagues in the Senate who have really made it possible for the public to start to be heard on this issue and for the media to take the time to understand the devastating impacts of this bill. I also think that next week we're going to hear a budget address from the governor, and he is going to propose the most radical, punishing budget in the history of the state of Wisconsin. He's talking about $1 billion worth of cuts to our educational system. It's just unimaginable. That's translating to 15% and 20% cuts in some districts. And we have to remember that schools have been underfunded chronically for decades, over 2 decades at this point. So they're really, for many of these districts, they are just hanging on by a thread. The cuts to local governments, first responder service and all of the health and human services that are provided, municipal governments, it is really very scary. Higher education system.
So not only is he pushing forward with the budget repair bill, he's unveiling massive cuts with the actual budget.
Yes, and given how much unrelated non-fiscal policy he crammed into this sham, so-called budget repair bill, I am very, very scared about what kind of policy items might be buried in this horrible budget. And while everyone is worried about, the massive cuts to local governments and to our school system, I think there's also going to be terrible, terrible policy items in there relating to all kinds of things, from reproductive rights and gay rights to who knows, gun policy, trying to eliminate people's civil rights. We've already seen an attempt to make it very difficult for students and seniors and the disabled to vote.
That's right, the photo ID bill, right?
Yes.
Has that gone up for a vote yet?
It hasn't, but one of the tactics that the Senate Republicans have used is that they have brought up the voter ID bill, which, since it's apparently it was non-fiscal, they thought they only needed 19 votes to have a quorum. Mm-hmm. And so they were going to deny Democrats the opportunity to be heard on that bill, to amend it. Now, of course, the bill actually does have a tremendous fiscal impact. It's extremely expensive. And in order to be constitutional, it's going to require spending tens of millions of dollars on our DMV and other kinds of services to make sure people can have this ID. So I don't think that's necessarily going to fly. But certainly it just goes to show you how hell-bent these Republicans are on really taking us backwards and restricting every type of right, whether it's the right to vote, the right to free speech, the right to democracy and a voice in your workplace.
Now, with I lost that question.
That's okay.
And have you been in contact with the rogue senators?
I've had a little bit of contact with them by phone and social media. Mm-hmm. And what's amazing is I actually was walking around the Capitol after the vote early in the morning, and people were sleeping there, and I just wanted to take in the scene and just remember this historical moment and take some mental photographs. And on the bust of Bob La Follette, which is in the first floor of the Capitol, somebody had posted pictures of all 14 of these Democratic senators. And I just thought that was a perfect Wisconsin testament to the courageous independence that these senators showed. And they said, we're not going to participate in this sham democracy. We are going to call out the powers that be and tell them that they need to stop and hear the voice of the people. And so I actually just had planned that I was going to email that to them, and thanks for reminding me to do that.
Glad I could. I remember the question I was before it was, is there any sign have the Republicans been moving in one cohesive block this whole time? I mean, it's always a trait of the party that they follow in lockstep very well.
Yes.
Has this been the case this entire time, or is there a sign of anybody breaking ranks?
It certainly has been shocking to us to see the discipline. Although there are starting to be some cracks, we knew that there probably would be cracks amongst the Republicans simply because the things that the leadership is proposing are so radical and really are not necessarily ideologically based. It's just about amassing power. And so there are plenty of these new Tea Party Republicans that, that don't really necessarily know the rules or traditions of the Assembly, but they ran on things like don't raid segregated funds, don't put policy on the budget. And now, in the first few weeks, they've been led down the primrose path by their governor, and they've had to abandon all of those things that they ran on. They've participated in a bait and switch on the public, saying that they were going to run on jobs and cutting the deficit. And then the first thing they did when they got into office is they passed a bunch of irresponsible, unfunded tax loopholes for corporations and have done not one single thing to create jobs except give back federal money that would have created thousands of jobs.
Yes, something I've been wondering about frequently is the Tea Party side of things, and how so much of what we're seeing seems contrary to what their professed beliefs are.
Well, again, I think that the hypocrisy that's been on display and the abuse of power and the corruption that has been shown by the leadership, they are really, at some point, the Republican rank and file is going to have to decide whether they want to continue down that path over the objections of their constituents and risk their own political futures. Because the thousands of people that came to the Capitol every day for the last almost 2 weeks are not disappearing. They're not going to go away and forget about this. And we've had national media attention. That pressure is not going to go away. So they're going to have to decide whether they're willing to continue following this governor down his radical path that's going to take our state backwards, or whether they actually meant what they said when they told voters that they cared about making Wisconsin a good place to live.
Are you aware of this sort of power grab anywhere else in the United States or in Wisconsin's history?
We've certainly looked back at Wisconsin's history to see what kind of procedural motions were used, and there has never, ever, in the recorded history that we could find of Wisconsin's legislature that we've ever seen, the kind of gross rule violations and abuse of power that have been on display, not just early this morning when they took the vote, but also last week and also earlier tonight during the proceedings, or earlier last night during the proceedings. So, I mean, it's a radical departure. And when you look at other legislative bodies, again, I don't think you find any example where you've seen that kind of deliberate misconduct to deny the minority its God-given right to speak. And given the allegations or the conversation that's come to light, where the governor thought he was talking to one of his billionaire, conservative funders, and was bragging about how he was using the layoff of thousands of state employees as a political tool to extort members of the legislature into doing what he wanted. I mean, that is just stunning to me, and I can't imagine that there are very many people in the state, and even in the Republican caucus, who think that that's an appropriate way to talk about people's lives.
Yeah, and speak more to that, because it has been a subject of focus lately, and it certainly gave us some insight into at least the way that he thinks. Was there anything else that stood out to you from that conversation?
Well, certainly the thing that was, I think, the most despicable in that conversation, which, as a whole was pretty shocking, was the total callous disregard for the lives of state workers. The idea that somehow you're taking delight in the fact that you're going to lay off 6,000 people, and no pretense that it has anything to do with money. The whole thing is a political game to this governor. The idea is, oh, I'm going to get together with the Fitzgerald boys, and we're going to force these Democrats to sit down and shut up and do what we want them to do, and they're going to cry uncle when we start laying off thousands of state workers. And we're going to play all these, tricks and gimmicks, and we're going to withhold paychecks from the senators, and we're going to lock down the Capitol offices so that people can't get into their offices and constituents can't come visit legislators. And I mean, it really is a tremendous abuse, gross abuse of power, and I think shows that he is really not prepared to lead, and he really isn't qualified to lead the state, because anyone who takes that kind of attitude about any job, public or private, any worker, that we're just going to use it for political fodder, I think that's outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly the call also raised a number of ethical questions. I'm not an expert in what types of possible violations, but I know that Wisconsin's previous Attorney General analyzed the phone call and found a number of different potentially illegal actions by the governor. So I hope that will be examined. I think that's important for the public to know.
Mm-hmm. Now, again, we were just talking about, speaking of tricks and arm twisting that they'll use to put pressure on both the senators and even the demonstrators.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain the new rule of closing down the Capitol earlier?
This is, I would say this is an attempt by the Fitzgerald brothers and the governor to shut down people's right to peaceably assemble. We've had 11 days of rallying for rights at the Capitol, involving, by some law enforcement estimates, over 500,000 people coming in and out of the Capitol building during that time. There has not been one incidence of violence, not one. Even though we know at conservative websites, we've actually found evidence that they're trying to plant people to incite violence. And the governor even discussed that in his phone call and said that he had considered it. So even with all that, we've had peaceful protests. Now, every day that goes by, more and more comes out about the governor's true hidden agenda, that it has nothing to do with fiscal policy. It's simply an assault on the rights of workers. And so it makes the Republicans look worse and worse. Of course they want to shut it down, but they can't, but they're trying to do it in a way that's quiet and doesn't draw a lot of attention to it. So obviously they failed at doing that in terms of the Assembly. They really created a huge ruckus and a circus by operating the way that they did. But I think they're, with these ralliers who have been sleeping in the Capitol, and by the way, tonight, the Wisconsin Professional Police Association, which is the most conservative union in the state of Wisconsin, it was actually, I think it got its initial seed funding from the NRA. They're the only law enforcement organization that supports concealed carry. Every other law enforcement organization opposes that. So they're very conservative, but they're with us on this. They believe workers have a right to democracy in their workplace and have a voice in what their work situation is going to be. So the fact that they're going to be at the Capitol tonight, I think, means that it's going to be very difficult for the Republicans to try to close the building and shut it down. Now, they've announced that it's their intention to do that, and I'm sure that they will, but again, I just don't think it's a very good visual to have all these law enforcement officers forcing peaceful protesters out of a place that they have a legal right to be. That is the people's house. Mm-hmm. And I, as a legislator, feel like it's my right to be in the Capitol and meet with my constituents at any time of the day or night that they want to meet with me, and I'm available and willing to do that. I sat through, 60 hours of session nonstop. I sat through days and days of public hearing overnight, and my feeling is that it's my responsibility as a legislator to be there and hear what the people have to say to the extent that I'm able to do it. And any action that the governor or anyone else wants to take to stop my responsibility as a legislator to hear people exercising their First Amendment rights. Again, it's a blatant abuse of power.
Now, what if they continue with these tactics and make further progress? Would you encourage an escalation? Maybe even would you join in a call for national strikes, for instance?
Well, I'm not sure. I think we've seen already that the Republicans are totally unwilling to even move an inch. I will not negotiate. In fact, the governor talked in that Koch brothers call about the fact that he was willing to trick the senators and the Democrats into thinking he might negotiate. But in fact, of course, he really wouldn't budge an inch. And he talked about this as a radical, he sees this as a historical moment himself. He wants to become some kind of Reagan-esque figure. The thing about Ronald Reagan is, love him or hate him, he knew when to make a deal. He knew that 80% was better than zero, and that's what James Baker, his Secretary of State, said. And that's a quality that we simply don't see in this governor. He just doesn't have that leadership ability, and that's been shown during the last 2 weeks.
Now, you've had many long days and long nights. As a final question, what is it that's really kept you going in all these long days and nights?
Well, as trying as it's been, and as just really heartbreaking and disappointing as it has been to see this kind of undemocratic abuse of power consistently by the governor and the Republican leadership, I also have to say that this has really been the most extraordinary time in my life to see thousands upon thousands of people coming out and really standing up and saying, we are not going to sit by silently as people try to take our rights away. That has really been inspiring. And anyone who doubts the wisdom of the population or thinks that somehow citizens aren't engaged or they don't care or they're not paying attention, I think this has really proven that to be not the case. I mean, people can use peaceful action to make a change. Had it not been for all those demonstrations, we wouldn't have even had a chance to stop this bill. And because they were rallying for their rights, loudly, consistently, peacefully, creatively, in a sense, they gave us our voice as a minority. Because we were able to say, hey, take a look at what's in this bill. Stop, slow down. We're not going to go along with you. We're not just going to, vote no and call it a day and put out our press release. We were actually able to engage the public and engage the media and the nation in a debate about whether people should have a voice in their workplace. And for that, I mean, that's just a tremendous privilege for which I'll always be grateful. And that's what's kept me going throughout this whole time and what will continue to keep me going.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, but if there was a question that I didn't answer because I was just drifting away, you can feel free to re-ask it. I won't be offended if there's something you wanted me to say.
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that was very good.
Great.